Hi, and welcome to Ditko, the show for hardcore Steve Ditko fans. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee, and Jack Kirby's Star Warriors. So this is Spider-Man number 33, the final chapter. And although this is not Steve Ditko's final Spider-Man comic, there is an argument to be made that this is a final chapter of sorts for the ongoing story of Spider-Man. So here it is, The Amazing Spider-Man, the final chapter. Like so many of the issues of Spider-Man, this is part of an ongoing serial with, one story continuing from the previous one and into the next. And so it's getting you up to speed with all the overhanging dramas. As Peter Parker's Aunt May lies dying in the hospital, victim of the effects of radioactivity in her bloodstream, a sympathetic Dr. Connors waits for Spider-Man to bring the ISO 36 to him, for it is the only serum which might save Peter's aunt. But the stolen serum is in the possession of Dr. Octopus, whose masked henchmen wait outside a steel door as Spidey and Doc Ock battle within. And none suspect that a sudden leak in the underwater dome of the hidden hideout is growing bigger and bigger, while Spider-Man himself, having beaten his multi-armed foe, is now trapped beneath tons of fallen steel, with the precious serum lying just out of reach as the fatal seconds tick by. Possibly one of the most thoroughly satisfying Spider-Man sagas you have ever thrilled to. Script and editing, Stan Lee. Plot and illustration, Steve Ditko. Bordering and lettering, Artie Simic. Reading and enjoying that old web spinner, you. So we have Aunt May at death's door, and she's been sick before in previous episodes, but this might be the big one. This is pretty dire, and she's sick with radiation poisoning, and Peter doesn't know for certain, but he thinks that he, with his radioactive spider blood, might be the one that gave this radiation sickness to Aunt May. So there's the extra guilt for that. And who's helping him create an antidote is Dr. Connors, who, again, had been established as part of the ongoing soap opera, begins as the villain, the lizard, and later on when Peter's helped him find a cure, now he's, a good friend to Peter. And then, there was a huge battle with Dr. Octopus in the previous issue, but that almost doesn't matter compared to what's going on here. That you'd think like a big battle with Dr. Octopus would be the culminating point of a story, but this is the real culminating point here. And his henchmen are waiting outside that if by some freak occurrence Spider-Man gets free, they're going to kick his ass. And there's just water flooding in anyway. So this is as bleak and dire as it gets. This is the most innovative and unforgettable part of this comic, and why this comic is so often cited and is probably the most famous moment in Spider-Man history. And comics creators take note of this. People like Frank Miller, for the longest time, to him this was the greatest moment in comics history. This is the moment where comics sort of most closely approached high art. And when he mentioned that, he mentioned it a little bit derisively, that this is the high point for this at a certain point in history was the high point for comic books, and we can do better than this. But this was a high watermark and just influenced so many creators, and it really is the beginning of decompressed storytelling in superhero comics. The way we're just extending this moment for page after page, Spider-Man trapped under this heavy bit of this giant piece of steel, basically part of the building that's fallen on him, and he's struggling. And it's even though there's repetition here, it's never boring. We see the drama play out, beat after beat, and he's just getting water dripped on him, and then he starts to maybe he's hallucinating, maybe he's just imagining, just sort of thinking about Aunt May, and this is a visual representation of that, and sees her sort of floating head as she's at death's door. And then he remembers Uncle Ben and how much he meant to him, and how he's gone, and maybe now Aunt May is going to join him. It's interesting to note that in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, they never mention this kind of stuff. They would mention, all kinds of drama, but they would never really mention, these ideas of putting in sort of floating heads or different, graphic approaches that aren't part of a visual reality, but help, further the story. That never made its way in. We get this shot of just how small Spidey is compared to this giant piece of steel. And we're zoomed out so far that we get sort of the animated cartoon Spider-Man where the webs aren't drawn on him, a little closer to Deadpool. And then we zoom in on Spidey, and he is struggling mightily and having an internal debate, and how important it is for him to overcome this impossible obstacle. And just something about the credits in the beginning, it said plot and illustration by Steve Ditko. And at this point in the history of Spider-Man, Steve Ditko has been creating these stories solo for a while, where he would just go off and make the story about whatever he wants it to be about without any conference with Stan Lee, and just bring in his pages, and then Stan would provide the verbiage and the dialogue, but that Ditko would be presenting him with a more or less finished story. You think you're going to turn the page and maybe see Spider-Man lift that thing, but we're not there yet. The struggle's still going on. And he's still, the cracks are widening and more water's rushing in. And then catharsis, he lifts it. And then as the agonizing ache in his limbs seems unendurable, as his superbly muscled body suffers the torment of a virtually indescribable ordeal, from out of the pain, from out of the agony comes triumph. I did it. I'm free. And yeah, we get to, glory in this moment. And this really sort of, perfection of the superhero myth, getting down to stripping it down to the essence. What are these guys about at the very, most basic level? And it's they're about lifting heavy things. He's lifting something really heavy, but it's more meaningful than it's ever been. The stakes are higher, and it's a real victory for him because of the struggle. He's overcome, that great hurdle, and it really is there's the progression of conflict in stories and the escalation, and the first step in this escalation is man versus man. Then the next step is man versus nature. And then the third and final step is man versus himself. So this wasn't, he'd already had the battle with Dr. Octopus, and now the more important battle was this battle with himself. Can he, push past, the failure of his body and still achieve this victory that he so desperately needs, that his aunt so desperately needs for him? And he's not out of the woods yet. He's out, but his leg is badly injured. He's limping for the remainder of the issue. It's a good thing he did it when he did it, because now the water's really pouring in. You get just this great sense of movement and motion and danger as the water rushes in, and then this really great sequence where you can really feel the water here, and with the sort of translucence of it. Ditko really made comics that move. And then here, as the water's whipping every direction, he's just being sucked through and trying to avoid all this sharp shrapnel and whatnot. And then finally, he gets, some air. When he thinks he's free, he gets pulled back in by these, scuba divers, and he struggles with them, rips out their air hoses, so they have to go back to the surface. And there they are back at the surface. Spider-Man's no murderer. And he climbs out, and, this gang of thugs is ready to kick his ass. And he's been through the ringer and more. And now he's in this fight, but he is and he's got this canister of that important isotope. And if you read the sort of thought balloons, he's just beyond exhaustion. And so he's just going to let them beat him up just so he can get some rest. Not too different from Muhammad Ali's rope-a-dope technique. He's going to let these guys go to town on him, get your licks in, and I'm going to rest up. And it's like, maybe this isn't such a great idea. Maybe it's getting pushed too far. But then, he starts remembering Aunt May again, remembering just how much she needs him, and marshals that like last little bit of strength. And now it's his turn, and he's just wailing away. And when he comes back to his senses, he sees it's over. Everybody's knocked out, and now he's if you compare his body language, just from earlier, how exhausted he was. Now he's like kind of slumped beyond what you'd think your body would be capable of. He is like almost turning like completely inward. Makes his way out before it's too late. He gets there, gives Dr. Connors the isotope, and then very quickly he takes a sample of his blood to test it against to see if it'll remove the radiation from the blood. And it works. And he can't tell Dr. Connors whose blood that was. He's got to maintain his secret identity, again, for the sake of his aunt, for the sake of the people he loves. And so he leaves with it, and sort of just in time, we've done all we can, but she's sinking rapidly. And here comes Spidey. And the doctors administer the cure. Spider-Man gets out. He snaps some pictures of all the different guys he beat up and whatnot. And we're going to find out why that's so important to him in a little bit. He calls up Foswell, J. Jonah Jameson's head reporter, and calls him down to get this story so he can snap some photos, and Foswell can write the story. J. Jonah Jameson is beside himself. He can't believe his luck. This amazing, the Master Planner's gang has been busted, and he's got the exclusive. As Peter, comes to the Daily Bugle offices, Betty Brant, his girlfriend throughout the series, sees him, and she's going to talk to him, and he's very roughed up, and he looks sort of more determined than ever. He looks like a movie cowboy or something, like this, this like 50s idea of like heroic stoicism. Certainly, Steve Ditko's idea of that. He looks just really determined. Looks a little bit closer to, like a matinee idol, and closer to the more grown-up Peter Parker that we're going to see when John Romita takes over as artist of the series. But he's like just very determined and telling Betty about like all the danger that he went through to get these pictures. And she's sort of having a flashback of, how her brother died and how she's just going to worry about Peter. And she runs away crying. And Peter knew that, by letting her in on that this is the effect that it would have. But talking about the final chapter, this seems like the sort of natural end point of the ongoing soap opera of his relationship with Betty, that this fear of loving somebody and having them die, this sort of, fear of men who she loves going into, getting themselves into harm's way, that kind of makes a relationship with Spider-Man impossible. Like if she's already this broken up by the idea of Peter going into dangerous situations to get pictures, if she finds out he's Spider-Man, then there's no hope of a relationship. And this is, again, sort of like a stoic cowboy kind of ending. It's a little bit like the ending of Tarzan, where he's going to have to walk a lonely path because, his mission in life makes the conventional life, love, romance, a family, impossible, or at least irresponsible to drag somebody else into this. And maybe there's some version here of Steve Ditko's own life path. So now he's talking to J. Jonah Jameson, and just like how he seems like a more grown-up Peter Parker in that previous scene, just the way he's drawn and everything, and the determination in his face. And we're seeing this more grown-up Peter Parker here. He's done fucking around with J. Jonah Jameson, and he is negotiating and playing hardball. And we find out the reason why he was going to all this trouble to get these photos after he delivered the medicine for his aunt is that he needs the money to pay these medical bills. So it's kind of a desperate situation, but he's not messing around. He's negotiating for exactly what he needs. Like he's got this limp. He's hurt his leg, and you see it sort of consistently represented throughout the story. He goes in and talks to the doctor to find out how how Aunt May is doing, and the doctor. It's kind of like that scene in Goodfellas where he's like, "Oh, hey, you look like you look like you're in pretty bad shape yourself," and so he runs a little checkup on him, and tells him, you better get home and get some sleep. You are in bad shape, Mr. Parker. He gets good news. The serum has stopped the blood deterioration. The reports are all favorable. With luck, we expect her to pull through. I didn't let you down this time, Aunt May. I didn't fail you. She's moving. Peter! It's all right, Aunt May. You're going to be well again. Everything is fine. Peter. She dropped off to sleep again. She's resting much easier now. The crisis has passed. She'd never have made it if not for that serum which Spider-Man brought us. I wonder where he fits into all this. I don't know, Doc, but maybe he's not quite as bad as some people think he is. Well, at any rate, you'd better go home and get some rest yourself. I think I'll be able to now. That Peter Parker certainly is a nice boy. He's sincere, well-mannered, and devoted to his aunt. Too bad there aren't many more young men like that. Too bad someone like him can't be an idol for teenagers to imitate, instead of some mysterious unknown thrill seeker like Spider-Man. And we get this, talking about decompression, we get this beautiful, 4-panel sequence of the shade coming down, the curtain coming down on Peter Parker as he walks off into the distance, and Aunt May gets some darkness for her to sleep, and we can still sort of see him through the blinds. This would be a great ending for the story of Spider-Man, and in a way it is. Obviously this isn't the final issue. This is called the final chapter, but obviously this isn't the final issue of Spider-Man. It continues, and it's not even the final Steve Ditko issue of Spider-Man. He still has maybe 4 or 5 more issues to go before he's done. And, next issue, it's going to be the return of Kraven the Hunter. So there's still going to be more Steve Ditko Spider-Man comics. But in a way, this is the final issue of Spider-Man. I think Ditko, deliberately sort of closes the book on Spider-Man here. The ongoing story of what Spider-Man was up to this point, the ongoing story of Spider-Man. And, Ditko has spoken about his ideas about heroism and what a hero is and what sort of a comic book superhero should be. And for Ditko, there's no inner drama or inner turmoil. A superhero knows what they have to do, and they do it. They don't feel sorry for themselves or meander and wonder what they should do. Like a hero, just knows what they need to do and does it. But Spider-Man seems to be an exception to that. Why did Ditko, co-create a superhero that had so much inner turmoil and indecision? The reason is that Spider-Man is a child. Spider-Man is a boy. He hasn't grown to manhood. He's not a man yet, and so he's allowed to have that sort of uncertain path he's gone on. But by the end of this story, he has graduated. He's no longer the child superhero or the superhero in training. He, by the end of this story, is like a full-fledged superhero. He is, Superman or Mr. A or whatever. Like, from this point on, and you'll see in the issues after this, the soap opera is done as far as Ditko's concerned. The issues after this are these sort of, done-in-one stories where it's Spider-Man versus a supervillain, and Spider-Man is not wallowing in indecision, questioning what he's going to do with his life. He, encounters these bad guys and takes them out of commission with a minimum of fuss. Had Ditko stayed on Spider-Man, it might have been like that for another 10 years. He might have been sort of, cut from the same cloth as, the Question or Mr. A or the Creeper, because that's what Ditko did for the rest of his career. And so in a way, this Spider-Man as we know him and love him as this sort of very human superhero, Ditko has closed the book on that. And it's probably why he didn't feel all that bad about leaving a few issues later, that he had sort of told that story. And now, he might as well tell the story of any superhero, because Spider-Man had graduated to that and was in that mold. The only other time I can think of where Ditko did heroes that did have sort of indecision and ongoing soap operas where they, just weren't sure what to do would be Hawk and Dove being teenagers, being, heroes in training, being child heroes. He allowed them that leeway. And then Speedball, which was another sort of, teenage child hero in the vein of Spider-Man. But, once you pass a certain age and a certain, threshold, a certain, when you graduate, when you go from being a boy to being a man, you're held to a much higher standard. And Peter Parker makes that transition within this issue, making this truly the final chapter. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee, and Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, The Adventures of Adam Starr and the Solar Legion.